All right, so let's talk about the changes so far and how they work and what they do. So again, this will change in PTR. There will be huge changes from where they are now. Things will get buffed, things will get nerfed. Soulbinds and Covenant ability tuning and Covenant legendary tuning will all shake up the meta from where it is right now. That will happen. But we can only call things as we see them when they make the changes, so I will tell you my thoughts on the meta as it stands right now based on the changes and like where the game is currently and how things are working out in raids. Okay, so Balance Druid. I saw everyone, you know, typical Moonkins. I don't know if you guys have ever been around the Moonkin community whenever they get nerfed or they're not the literal best class in the game, but you will see all the popular content creators posting memes of their class being garbage and stuff like that, assuming they're not literally the best class in the game in every scenario. That's just very common, so don't look too much into that. The Solstice talent basically killed that talent in the row. The New Moon talent, I don't know if that'll ever be used, but the 20-second recharge obviously is a nice buff. A lot of people know the, know about moons because of Convoke, but you don't usually play the talent. Stellar Drift was redesigned. Now has a 15-second cooldown. That's going to be a pretty big nerf to their overall AoE. Then they nerfed Boat. So Boat is going to be a pretty big Convoke nerf. If you look after 3 seconds, so 40 to 32 to 24 to 16. After 3 seconds, Boat used to be at 16% crit. And after 3 seconds now, Boat will be, after 3%, it's going to go to 21, 18 to 15. So they're within 1% of each other after 3 seconds is over. And then after 3 seconds, the new Boat will actually be better than the old one. But this is an obvious and clear nerf to Convoke, right? More than anything else. But it's not, I don't know if they'll still use it. They might still use it. I know there's a data mined Night Fae legendary or something like that that makes Convoke a 1-minute cooldown, and that's with like less spells or something, with new moon or with full moon being more likely to fall. So who knows? But very cool changes. All right, so I think Balanced Druids thinking that it's the end of the world is an overreaction. They are on top of the game right now. They are arguably the most kind of well-balanced overall DPS class in a raid. They have good single target. They have the best spread out AoE in the game by far currently before nerfs. They're unkillable. They have the best endurance conduits in the game. They have Roar, which is major raid utility with there being less Guardian Druids, even though Guardian's really good. And Shamans, right? Basically, Moonkins are like a god tier raid class. I will say, in my mind, this nerf moves Balanced Druids out of a certain raid comp. If you were to say with Balanced Druids with no nerfs, you'd probably go into the next raid tier with at minimum optimally at least 2 Guardian Druids in on the entire raid, and the possibility of stacking up to 5 of them on a boss that has, Council-esque, even though Moonkins on Council are insanely overrated because almost all of that Starfall damage is just padding. Yes, it's killing the waiters, they need to die, but they don't actually die until they get gripped onto the boss, in which they die instantly anyway. Unless you have enough Moonkins and Affliction Locks to kill the waiters before they ever get gripped in on Council, every bit of damage you're doing to them is completely irrelevant. So even though those two classes shred on Warcraft logs, the fact that the waiters never actually die in any real comp until they get gripped under the boss or the boss moved on top of them means that damage is largely overrated. But there could be a raid fight where that damage is really, really valuable. And, those ads could need to die, and they could never get gripped under the boss, in which Moonkin gains a lot of value from that. Now, with these changes, obviously Druids are a nerfed version of what they are now, but I still think Moonkins have a niche. When we talk about the meta rankings of every class in the game, what did we constantly go over, right? There's different levels to this shit. It's not good and bad. It's like whether your class has clear value in its current form versus a class that doesn't have clear value. Yes, a class that doesn't have clear value could be tuned really high and end up being good, but it's way more likely that a class with clear value or a clear niche is going to be brought to raid content. In an ideal scenario, again, this is world first stuff, not like lower ranked guild stuff. You can bring any class you want, but just being completely optimal, Moonkin is still good. Because if you need to bring a class, and I guess we'll have to see the raid, because again, you need to see context to realize what classes are going to be good when, because there's so many of them that have different strengths. If there is a class with spread out AoE, I still think Moonkin is the best class in the game for it. Affliction Lock might be slightly better or very close or equivalent. But regardless, I think you're going to see a lot less Affliction play now in general, so that would make Balance a more streamlined version of getting that. So Balanced Druid, The world is not ending. I still think you have a valuable raid spot depending on the fight now. I just don't think it's something where a world first guild will permanently run them on every boss unless something else has changed. Now that, again, I'm not telling you guys what we're running or not running. I'm not saying that to deceive you, but I'm just telling you that, like, if your guild still runs 1 or 2 Moonkins next raid, I think that would be perfectly fine. I think they're just fine. Affliction is really bad, specifically in AoE. Nope. Affliction is one of the best, if not the best class now that balances nerfed at spread out AoE. That's true. That's a true statement. I'm not saying you're going to play Affliction. I'm just saying Affliction specifically still has that niche. They will be, if you have multiple targets spread out, 4 to 5 targets that are not under the boss, Affliction will be one of the best class in the game at dealing with exactly that. Just straight up. That's still true. All right, we'll keep going down the list, though. We'll get to this class and a lot of your bad takes in a second. All right, Fire Mage. Flame Strike reduced by 10%. Flame Patch, the talent reduced by 10%. Kindling the talent, cooldown reduction for combustion reduced to 1 second, was 1.5. Infernal Cascade, fire damage bonus reduced by 20%. So, again, the sky is not falling. I think this is more of a targeted Mythic Plus nerf than anything else. In the next raid, I'd have to see the fights, but I haven't seen a single fight that has mass AoE in it. Literally, the entire raid. Like, of all of these fights in Sanctum of Domination, I looked through this in-depth on stream yesterday and very in-depth off stream afterwards. If there's a situation where there's 10 plus ads in this raid, it might be on a mid-tier boss, but I didn't read it. Like, Kel'Thuzad has a lot of ads, but more than 6? Probably not. Either way, though, like, the idea of, like, Fire Mage uncapped AoE was really only insane in this raid on outside of meaningless bosses on the beginning of Denathrius, on the very first wave of Denathrius ads, so you can kill the first wave before you start lagging. But I think this is more of an AoE than anything. Now, obviously, their cooldown reduction for combustion, I've been told that you can still get a 1-minute combustion potentially without help by just running a bit more crit and just with new gear scaling. You could get it down to 1 minute as it was before, but I've heard that, like, it's not as big of a nerf as a lot of people think. Okay, this is definitely a nerf. Like, this, again, this is what I was told, like, could be somewhere between a 3 to 4% just straight up single target nerf. Again, we're speaking specifically for raids. Mass AoEing is something that a lot of mages think about, but it's something that very rarely exists in raids, and this is not about dungeons. I feel like fire could still definitely be used on raid content. I think frost is probably going to be more of your go-to right now. I think frost is just, I think before fire was nerfed, I think depending on the end boss, fire or frost could have ended up being better depending on the situation. I think fire has a little bit of an advantage in execute, but also arcane in execute is insane with the barrage legendary. Like, literally, and they have infinite movement too. Like, you can literally arcane explosion and barrage over and over again and just permanently move and execute, and that could be replacing what fire is now after these nerfs, potentially. And then frost, obviously, we don't need to talk about where frost sits, right? Frost is probably it is the best funnel DPS in the game. It's great consistent AoE. It's really good single target. They're actually one of the best classes for getting Fey Guardian on their CDs, which is definitely going to be something potentially flowing around now, which we'll get into later. So frost has, I don't know, mages, you don't need me to sit here and tell you that mages are going to be fine. Mages are always fine. Mages are a god class. Blizzard will not ever let mage be bad. So don't worry about it if you're a mage. And even if you play fire, I still think fire is a great raid spec, even with these changes. A lot of times earlier when you had CDR for combustion, you were often saving it for trinkets to come back up anyway. If you have enough crit next tier to get it close to where you need it to be now, I don't think the kindling nerf is going to be that big of a deal. I think this one definitely is. And this is more of a Mythic Plus nerf and very not important in raids. So I think fire's still fine. The sky is definitely not falling. That's how I feel about mage. Yep. Priest. Spirit Shell talent increased to 90 seconds. That's a big nerf. I don't know how I feel about discipline. Well, actually, let's read all of these before we talk about discipline, because talking about disc also includes talking about holy, and this is relevant there. So, holy, symbol of hope, has been redesigned. Bolster the morale of party or raid members within 40 yards. They each recover 60 seconds of cooldown on a major defensive ability, and they regain 12% of their missing mana over 5 seconds. And then the shadow thing, just to touch on shadow. We'll talk about shadow after. Let's just talk about healer priest. So that nerf's pretty fucking big. I still think there's a scenario that you play Spirit Shell, and that would be something where a raid boss has just one specific ability that you literally need Spirit Shell to live through. But that's really rare. If you think about it, what did you need Spirit Shell to live through on this raid? In progression, and I'll use our guild for example, because we did this at the lowest possible eye level, so like we needed I would know when stuff was literally required. Sludge Fist is not true. Sludge Fist, you could have definitely done that fight without Priest. In fact, the only reason we used 2 discs was because we needed the power infusion to have enough damage to even kill it. Was it good on Dancing Fever? Yes. Was it really good on Hungering? Yes. Hungering was a joke boss. Same with Council, dead in 12 pulls. But it was 1 minute and it was very efficient, but it wasn't something you needed to live. Week 1, you could have absolutely killed Hungering, certainly without a disc priest, and you could have killed Council week 1, certainly without a disc priest. So it was definitely not required. Now, blood price on Denathrius, very real. Sire Denathrius, P3 blood price, and Sire Denathrius, P1 blood price, although P1 was a bit easier and you could game it with your stacks. That was where Spirit Shell had massive, 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 massive value. But can anyone in chat, without me telling you, explain why Spirit Shell was specifically so good on that mechanic and why other things that you're usually used to dealing with stuff there, like other CDs you would use to deal with that, is there? 1 minute CD? No. Does anyone get it? Because you need to move. Because you're in the air. It lifts you up. Exactly. It lifts you up. Blood price wouldn't even be a talked about mechanic if they left you on the ground and allowed you to Spirit Link, Barrier, AMZ, or do basically anything besides Aura Mastery and Rally it. It would have made Spirit Shell, again, very good in that situation, but not required to do it. And that was only because of lore and RP shit. The only reason Blood Price was a thing at all, even though it was a terrible design mechanic, why the fuck would you ever willingly put people in the air and stun them and knock them back? Like, that's fucking annoying, right? They did that just for RP reasons. Just for some reason, like, they felt like that's what the sex demon Denathrius, Mr. Donnie, is all about. You know, that's his thing. Okay, they do the same thing, by the way, if you paid attention in Sanctum of Domination. Look at Sylvanas, right? They do Windrunner. Sylvanas Windrunner is by far one of the most talented fighters from Azeroth and can execute multiple abilities in quick succession, rapidly changing position to suit her combat needs. While under the effects of Windrunner, spells and abilities strike Sylvanas from where she cast it. Does that make sense? She's going to be right in front of me, right here. I'm going to be attacking her, and I can attack her clone as she goes all around the platform, shooting shit at you, and you have to learn how to dodge it. You know what else you notice about this ability? It's only in P1. It's not in any other phase. Why? Because it's cringe fucking RP shit. That's the only reason it's there. This is like Deathrunner or Windrunner is literally blood price. It's the only reason blood price existed. It just so happened that we did an end boss where the RP ability knocks you in the air and you can't use any defensives on it just because of RP reasons. So that is why that was a thing. So coming all back to Spirit Shell, you have to ask yourself when Spirit Shell is actually required. And the answer is honestly not very often, although it is still very good. And honestly, at a 60-second cooldown, I could have still seen it used on multiple fight mechanics. There will be mechanics where even on a longer cooldown, Spirit Shell alone vastly helps your success chances on the fight. You could run like 2 discs, for example, and have 1 up every 45 seconds or something like that if it specifically fits the fight. That'll be a case-by-case basis. I think in general, though, disc is still good. If you play Evangelism disc, I think used correctly, which I think like is kind of, you know, that's basically what disc has been for the past couple years, is what Evangelism disc is right now. You know, it is one of the harder specs in the game. You have to really time your thing right. You have to make sure healers aren't overlapping cooldowns. And if you let a full Evangelism ramp go, you're going to do a ton of healing. It's just that when you look at the overhealing value of it, that's why Spirit Shell is so good. Spirit Shell rarely had any overhealing, where Evangelism typically has a lot. So you will have to play it better. It'll be harder to pull off, but it's there. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning Evangelism instead of going directly to Holy, because I feel like Holy still has a few issues with it. So yes, this Symbol of Hope change is nice, and in fact, I would like to actually test this Symbol of Hope change right now before we talk about the rest of it. Actually, no. I'm going to make a custom group. It's gonna be called Holy. If you're a Holy Priest, please sign up for this. So Symbol of Hope, now this is good because of the way it works, and I want to show you the way it works. So the reason I wanted to show that was for that reason, but they already changed it. So I think this definitely does make Holy a little bit better. The mana thing has always been there the whole expansion. This is very weak. A 5-minute cooldown that regains 12% of your missing mana is dog shit. Even in this situation where you're using it at the end of the fight and it's in its like that's the best scenario for it, but then like you're not using it for the defensive cooldown benefit, which is way more valuable than the missing mana. If it was 12% total mana at any time, I think that would be a lot better. But still with Holy, though, I don't know if you're going to see Holy in raid comps. I think it's possible, especially if you need Night Fae stuff. Holy can easily play Night Fae, where Disc playing Night Fae is massively worse without mind games. So if you need, like, you know, if you want to make one of your healers be Night Fang and PIing someone, there's a couple of really good Night Fae targets. Fire Mage, after the Kindling nerf to get their thing closer to 1 minute, is way better than it used to be. Because I think when you used to Night Fae mages, I don't think it actually gave them too many extra uses of Combust. It was pretty overrated. It would have to be for something very specific. Frost Mage is really, really good for Night Fae at the moment. It kind of double dips there. So like there's other targets for that, and it's kind of on a fight by fight basis. Like I think there's multiple uses for Night Fae. Like I think a lot of 5-minute sim people will just look at like who it's the best for overall. But like let's just say you're doing a fight and like you're running a Havoc DH, right? Havoc DH is good right now. That's fine. But if you give a Havoc DH 2 PIs after the open, or 2 Night Phase after the opener, it can make their meta 3-minute and 20-second cooldown, and that can be the difference between him having his major cooldown up for Lust versus not having it up for Lust. If you guys have ever played a Demon Hunter, you know exactly what I'm talking about, where you've done a fight, and because you're just the only class in the game with a fucking 4-minute cooldown, that there's plenty of times where your meta isn't up for Lust, and you could simply just use Fey Guardians for that exact reason and fix that problem, which would be better than something else. So, you know, just it's probably going to be more used outside of any super OP use to be used to get cooldowns up for something where they otherwise would not be. That's basically the reason for that. So I think that's good for Holy, but again, I don't know if Holy does enough throughput to be put in a raid where they're just doing less damage than Disc. If Holy is doing some damage while healing, that's fine. Typically, it's very low. If anything, it's probably like a 1k less than Disc, unless something has majorly changed with the class recently. And if you want to say that Symbol of Hope has really good value and that it'll give you an extra use of personals, the average personal in World of Warcraft, not counting immunities, is a 20% damage reduction. A barrier is a 25% damage reduction. We'll have to see the raid, but if you're able to stack on some of the harder bosses, barrier is just going to be better than this new change still, and Disc does more damage. And if you can find a way to work in evangelism ramp windows where it'll have very little overhealing by just assigning CDs correctly, I think Evangelism Disc, if you're going to use the healer spot for Holy, or for a priest in general, which you could bring another healer. You know, you could bring Druid, you could bring something else. Like, even though Druid has similar problems to Holy, you could end up just bringing more Paladins, for example, right? Like, Paladins still right now do insane damage and insane healing, so what do you do in that scenario? So, I don't think Disc is dead. The only thing I'm saying with Disc is I think Spirit Shell might be dead. If it's not dead, it's something that is going to be used in extremely specific situations. And you're just probably going to play Evangelism regardless. That's my opinion. Again, it kind of depends on the raid fight. Long thing about Priest, but yeah. Shadow, very minor slap on the nerf. Shadow Priest does unbelievably high single target right now. They need a little bit of a single target nerf. This conduit is something they use that's very good. It's a very small slap on the wrist. If you're a Shadow Priest, you're very happy about seeing this, because Blizzard acknowledges rightly that your class seriously needs to get single target nerfed. I would argue that if they nerf your single target, they should also make your dots a little better. That doesn't really matter, though. This is two things for Shadow. Again, you're happy that this is the nerf you got, because Blizzard at this very moment in time thinks that your class has been addressed when they haven't. And I don't know. If I was a Shadow Priest, how I would go into next raid, I would be expecting another nerf so that you're mentally prepared for that when it almost certainly happens, either right before the raid or in PTR. And then if it doesn't happen, you'll be happy. But if you're as a Shadow Priest and you're like, bro, we're going to make it with no other nerfs, you're just going to end up being disappointed. Your class is going to get nerfed again. Can almost guarantee it. Even though I would argue that I think Shadow Priest doing top tier single target isn't bad game design. As always. Shadow Priest doing top tier single target makes sense because they're genuinely very average or bad at everything else. Yeah, you should ask yourself the question. If Shadow Priest single target is nerfed to where other classes do as much, why would you ever bring a Shadow Priest? It's not a bad question. There is some reason, but because I think what Shadow Priest excels at is more fluid, consistent overall fight DPS rather than bursts and big windows, which is very, very valuable depending on what kind of fight you're doing. So, went over all of that. Okay, now Warlocks. So the Dark Pact thing is nice. When I've played Warlock in my time... Ella, stop it. Or when I played Warlock, sorry, Dark Pact has always been one of my favorite talents. I think depending on the fight and the timings of huge hits, I think Dark Pact can actually be really strong. The Destro buff is good. Nice Chaos Bolt damage increase again. Hopefully Destro is the spec to play. I've always loved playing with Destro locks, and most Warlock players I know prefer Destro because it's just way more multifaceted. You have target switching. You have AoE when it calls for it, and you have decent spread to target damage. Where most other Warlock specs are pretty one-dimensional, Demo is basically a single target drone with a little bit of meaningless on-boss cleave. And Affliction does very, very good spread out damage, but after these nerfs, their single target got nerfed pretty significantly. Most of it is single target. Now notice they buffed Agony, they nerfed Malefic Rapture, they buffed Agony. I believe, at least according to THD, that their AoE is either not nerfed at all. Their spread AoE is not nerfed at all. In fact, you could argue with Agony it's potentially buffed in certain scenarios. However, I think it's going to be harder to bring classes like this that are only good at spread cleave because, in my opinion, I think Moonkins will be a little bit better of overall raid classes than Affliction now, and they hold the exact same niche as this spread out damage. It's possible that their spread out damage is better than Moonkins now, but I think Moonkins are a better overall raid class. And I think Destro is probably your best bet either way. So I think Warlocks, obviously, you don't need to have anyone patting your back, right? Warlocks are a god class and they're always good. Also, most Warlock players I know prefer Destro to Affliction. Affliction's pretty boring. But yeah, this is a pretty big stacked up AoE nerf and a pretty big single target nerf. But the spread AoE, which is something that is definitely in their wheelhouse, is still pretty good. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. Now, one thing I'm not going to talk about today is like Covenant stuff. There's so many new Soulbinds, man. Like here, let me log on my monk for a second. So if you look at your renown tree, right? Like I'm just going to use one example. End of Pelagos. Was it this guy? Here it goes. If you use Mikanikos or whatever, Weapons of Order releases a blast of overcharge anima at your target's location, dealing 10k arcane damage split evenly over all targets over 8 seconds. Reduce the cooldowns of Weapons of Order by 8 seconds per affected enemy up to a maximum of 40 seconds. I haven't looked at all classes with this, but for any class where Kyrian is even remotely good for you, if you use it in an AoE scenario and you run this Soulbind, depending on the class, I think every class is capped at a 33% reduction on their main spell. And I haven't looked at some of the lower cooldown ones, but that could potentially be really, really good. Like, it wouldn't be good for Windwalker, I don't think, because it's just going to end up desyncing your Weapons of Order from your Tiger. But I was talking to Trill about it, and you could do something where if you could do it every time, you would definitely do it, but then you probably just wouldn't run the Invoker's Legendary. You would probably run a different Legendary, because lining up for the Tiger outside of the opener would basically never happen if you use this on cooldown. But I'm not talking specifically about Windwalker. It could be... I'm talking of all the classes that play Kyrian. Maybe Kyrian Hunter, right? Like reducing the cooldown of your Kyrian ability by 33% every single time if there's AoE, which is like when the Kyrian ability is decent. You know, that could be strong, or using it on other classes, right? Like this is definitely something to watch. The fact that there's a Soulbind that's going to give you a 33% cooldown reduction on your Kyrian ability, depending on the class, could be really strong. So, and the only reason I'm using this one specific one is to note that there's one of these for every tree. So because the PTR just came out, there's no one out there that's already deeply looked at all of this to see how it works. And not to mention that Blizzard's going to nerf and buff plenty of these things. They just added them. So that being said, I think that alone could majorly change like class viability. Like think about Divine Toll with that, right? Having a 40-second Divine Toll definitely makes that a lot better.